And now with the BBC News at 10 on BBC One, Hugh Edwards.
Tonight at 10, a meeting of the Cabinet's Emergency Committee to respond to the cyber attack on parts of the NHS. Routine surgery and GP appointments have been cancelled in some areas, but the NHS in England and Scotland is making a recovery. Experts say it's a wake-up call amid claims that the government at Westminster has failed to invest properly in IT systems.
We've been making huge efforts to modernise and invest despite all the financial pressures, and that's why we were able to maintain our emergency services.
We'll have the latest on the services affected, and we'll be asking what new measures are being considered. Also tonight, on the campaign trail, as Theresa May promises more workers' rights, one voter confronts her about cuts in welfare benefits.
I want you to do something for us. Do you know what I want? I want my disability living house to come back, not have PIPs and get nothing. I can't live on £100 a month. They took it all away from me.
Jeremy Corbyn says Labour would invest an extra £7.5 billion a year in the NHS in England. 16 years after a teenage girl disappeared in Essex, police spend the day searching a block of garages in Thurrock. And we visit the village football team in the Cotswolds, celebrating their rise to the English Football League.
And coming up in Sports Day on BBC News, Chelsea receive a guard of honour as the Premier League champions take on Watford at Stamford Bridge. Lots of goals there tonight.
Good evening. The government's emergency committee, COBRA, has been in session considering its response to the global cyber attack which has affected parts of the NHS in England and Scotland. Some hospital trusts are still experiencing problems, but the National Crime Agency says fears of a new wave of attacks today have not been realised. Microsoft has said that the attack should be treated as a wake-up call, and the government has been accused by some of failing to invest properly in IT systems. Our security correspondent, Gordon Carrera, has the latest.
Hospital wards still dealing with the aftermath of Friday's cyber attack. The hope is that the worst has passed, but the question remains, could this have been avoided? The Health Secretary today denied accusations from Labour and the Liberal Democrats that computer security had been underfunded and the NHS underprepared.
We've been making huge efforts to modernise and invest despite all the financial pressures, and that's why we were able to maintain our emergency services, why more than 95% of services were up and running within 24 hours. And I think that's an extraordinary achievement.
I think the perception has been that this was a form of malicious software that was blasted out, and only those institutions which weren't secure enough were affected by it.
Well, we have a criminal investigation going on at the moment by the National Crime Agency to try and understand exactly why people chose to target who they did. But as I say, if you look internationally, this has affected more than 200,000 victims in 150 countries.
But those who didn't have good enough security.
Well,
and that it looks like it includes the NHS.
Well, the NHS is a huge network, the world's largest health IT network, and over 80% of the NHS was unaffected.
This evening, officials gathered for the Cabinet Emergency Committee, COBRA, including the head of the National Cyber Security Centre. He says guidance was issued before this attack, but acknowledged people needed to act on such warnings.
There is a lot of information out there about vulnerabilities, and there's a lot of information out there about how to defend against them. My message to all organisations is go find out what those basic steps are you can do to raise your defences and go and implement them.
The malicious software was first detected on Friday, and it spread rapidly around the world, affecting computers which were not updated and secured. Some of the other companies and institutions hit include FedEx, Renault in France, German Railways, Spanish Telecoms and Nissan. Victims were faced with this message, that they were locked out of their computers and would have to pay a ransom to regain access. A race is underway to track down those responsible. One company who works with law enforcement say it's a question of waiting for the money to move.
The attackers will be sitting waiting for as much money to collect as possible before they start working out when and how they'll move that. And that'll be a complicated process for them to try and make sure that they move it without being detected.
In the health service, they're hoping that the worst of this attack is now over. But there's no guarantee that there won't be others in the future. Gordon Carrera, BBC News.
As we mentioned earlier, routine surgery and GP appointments have been cancelled in parts of the NHS as it recovers from the cyber attack. It's thought that some 16 trusts out of 47 that were hit on Friday are still facing some problems, leading to further cancellations and delays to services. Our health editor, Hugh Pym, has more details.
It's an IT problem, but it has a human cost. Claire Hobday is receiving intensive treatment for breast cancer, but it's been put on hold since the cyber attack brought down systems on Friday.
I'm very frustrated. I was in tears this morning. I've only had one treatment, supposed to have it Friday, didn't, not having it today. They've rung me this morning, said it's not happening today, possibly not tomorrow. That's 5 days out. Well, if I'm supposed to have it every day and it's very intense, what happens with missing 5 days? If I don't have this, am I being given, a death sentence?
Jess Lawton had waited months in constant pain, which she hoped would ease when her leg was amputated. She was in hospital on Saturday ready for the operation, but it was cancelled. She said that was devastating.
Horrible. Cried a lot. Didn't really know what to say, because that was the last thing we expected him to come in and say, was that there'd been a cyber attack and everything was cancelled.
NHS England told people to go to hospital appointments if they hadn't heard otherwise. Some took the advice and travelled in only to be disappointed they didn't happen.
I thought, I've got to go to hospital, I wonder if this is going to affect me. And then I thought, no, because someone would have got onto me, phoned me, or so I thought, I will go. And then it didn't.
This GP practice has been running normally today, but on Friday all systems had to be shut down. It was impossible to issue electronic prescriptions and to bring up patient notes. Today there has been a backlog of work dealing with messages and taking paper notes and transcribing them to put on the system. The technology is not running normally at this GP practice in Nottingham. This morning they were open but weren't sure which patients were booked in.
Patients know they're coming and we're dealing with them as they come. When we have phone calls for emergencies or people turning up at the desk, we're then improvising, you might say. But this is something that we used to do in the past. Although we had a written system, we didn't know who was going to be contacting us on the day. And it's back to how we used to work 15, 20 years ago.
Hospital managers have been working round the clock to make their information networks safe. At Colchester, they say they've fixed half of their 3,000 computers, and there's still a lot of work to do.
It will take a long time to get all our systems back up and running. We've got enough to make the organisation safe, but we do need to make sure we get those other systems back up and running as soon as possible.
Wales and Northern Ireland weren't caught up in the cyber attack. NHS leaders in England and Scotland will feel the systems have performed as well as could have been hoped today. But longer term, there are some big decisions to make about future investment and IT security. Hugh Pym, BBC News.
Well, let's talk to our security correspondent, Gordon Carrera, who's with me now. And Gordon, just picking up on some of the points in your report, what's the latest assessment now on the likelihood of another attack and the kind of measures that people are putting in place?
Well, there were a lot of very nervous cyber officials this morning when people went back to work and switched their computers on. But there was no second wave of attacks or victims today, although some still residual impact from that attack on Friday. So this attack looks to be over, but the real fear is about what may be still to come. I mean, one problem is that this attack used some codes, some tools, which were actually developed by America's National Security Agency, its spy agency, which were then stolen and then leaked onto the internet as part of a cache of cyber weapons. The fear is more of those weapons could be reversioned and deployed to attack infrastructure and attack companies. And so I think that the cat and mouse game between attackers and defenders is going to go on. You're going to see defenders trying to catch those who did it, but that can be hard. But I think there is also a priority on improving our defences, and that involves individuals as well as institutions doing pretty basic things like keeping your computer up to date, backing up data. If people do those things, then they will at least do something to mitigate, to stop some of the cyber attacks that unfortunately we're bound to see in the future.
Gordon, once again, thanks very much. Gordon Carrera there for us, our security correspondent. Now, in the past few minutes, it's been confirmed that the Moors murderer, Ian Brady, has died at the age of 79. He'd been receiving palliative care at Ashworth Hospital, that's a secure psychiatric unit on Merseyside. He'd been ill for some time. Brady was jailed for 3 murders back in 1966. Daniel Sanford has this report.
Few murders, before or since, have caused such revulsion. The discovery of children's bodies on Saddleworth Moor left the public wondering who could commit such dreadful crimes and why. Ian Brady was a petty criminal who grew up in Glasgow, where he's remembered for his cruelty to other children and animals. He later took a job in Manchester, and when his company hired a new typist called Myra Hindley, the couple became lovers, and Brady led her into a world of sadism. Outwardly a normal couple, they became serial killers, abducting, sexually assaulting and murdering children. When Brady and Hindley were arrested, they said nothing, challenging detectives to prove their guilt. They remained silent even when police had found 3 children's bodies in shallow graves on Saddleworth Moor. Years later, Brady told the BBC his remorse for the crimes was painfully deep, but he could never explain his motive. Until her death in 2002, his accomplice blamed him, but if anything, she became the greater hate figure.
He, in many ways, escaped some of the disgust that the public should feel for him because he was accompanied by a woman, and I'm not sure that he got his fair share of public hatred.
In the 1980s, the 2 killers made full confessions and went back to the moors separately to help the search for other victims. Pauline Reed's body was eventually recovered, but Keith Bennett's grave was never found.
I wanted one of them to come up with the truth so I could nail the 2 of them. Nail them for the rest of their life like they'd nail me down. I wanted them prosecuted for Keith's death.
Winnie Johnson died in 2012, regretting to the end that she'd been unable to give her son a Christian burial. Brady spent the last years of his life in Ashworth High Security Mental Hospital. In 1999, he decided to die and stopped eating, so doctors force-fed him using a tube. He wrote many letters to the BBC complaining about his treatment, and in 2012 unsuccessfully petitioned to be returned to a normal prison. He continued to vent his anger at Myra Hindley for trying to minimise her role in the Moors murders. Although Ian Brady's crimes now belong to another era, they will be recorded as among the most infamous ever seen in Britain.
That was Daniel Sanford reporting. Richard Lister, our correspondent, is with me monitoring the reports as they're coming in. This news came in the past few minutes, Richard.
Yes, I've just got off the phone actually with Merseycare NHS Foundation Trust, who are responsible for the care of Ian Brady, and a spokesman said, "We can confirm a 79-year-old patient in long-term care at Ashworth High Secure Hospital has died after becoming physically unwell." Now, the BBC understands that that patient is in fact Ian Brady. That is confirmed. He has been very ill for some time. At a court hearing in February, lawyers said that he had been bedridden for the last couple of years, and it was fair to say then that he was terminally ill.
Richard, again, thanks very much. Richard Lister there with the latest on that news. Well, let's pick up then again on some of today's election news, because Labour is promising an extra £37 billion for the NHS in England over the next 5 years if it wins power. The investment would be funded by tax increases and extra borrowing. Jeremy Corbyn claimed that the Conservatives had driven healthcare into crisis. Our political editor, Laura Koonsberg, has this report.
They gathered in Yorkshire to cheer him. Like other Labour leaders before, could Jeremy Corbyn use the NHS to rise to victory?
On behalf of millions of people, thank you to everyone in the NHS that looks after us all the year round and cope with so many other crises.
Meet the man who wants to be Labour's health secretary in less than 4 weeks.
This election is about the future of the NHS.
He says Labour would spend £37 billion extra over 5 years on the NHS in England. That's roughly an extra 7% each year. paid for by higher income tax at the top. But can he be completely precise about how he'd spend it?
Pay, winter crises, reducing the waiting lists, treating 1 million more people in A&E, public health budgets will be ring-fenced, the reversal of pharmacy cuts, and capital investment in the infrastructure of the NHS.
But that's still a long way off 37 billion, Jonathan.
I know, but the NHS it does take, it does cost money to run the NHS.
How much do you expect there to be coming from that new tax on people at the top?
The lion's share of our extra investment will come from new personal taxation levels for the top 5% of earners.
So that new personal tax for people at the very top, that's money for the NHS
all
as far
of it,
as you're
every
concerned.
single penny piece.
Exactly how much? You'll have to wait till tomorrow.
How's business generally for you at the moment?
But it's one of the perceptions she wants to overturn.
Provided I'm elected on the 8th of June, we will be up there fighting hard.
That the Tories somehow don't really believe in the health service. Voters sceptical about their handling of public services.
I'm sticking up for mental health and learning disabilities.
Kathy Mohan in Oxfordshire took the Prime Minister to task on mental health and welfare.
I want you to do something for us. I can't live on £100 a month. They took it all away from me. The fat cats keep the money and us lot get nothing. Please.
An awkward encounter. And no detailed answers for Kathy or anyone else for a couple of days. The Tories won't reveal their plans for the health service until later this week, but question Labour's sums.
The thing about the Labour Party's proposals is that you have to ask the question, where would the money come from? Because you can only fund the NHS, you can only ensure we have a first-class NHS if we have a strong economy.
Behind you!
It's politics, not panto, honestly. But like Labour, the Lib Dems would raise income tax to plug the NHS's gaps.
If you want the best health and social care in the world, then it will cost you, but you will get it. It will cost you 1 penny on income tax for an additional £6 billion a year, 30 billion over a parliament.
Scottish babies get kissed in elections like everywhere else, but health's devolved, like in Wales and Northern Ireland too.
So we're committed to increasing the NHS budget by £2 billion over this Scottish Parliament. That's £500 million more than inflation.
A huge turnout for Jeremy Corbyn tonight in Leeds, but a huge turnaround is what he needs if the NHS or anything else is to end up in Labour's hands. Laura Kunsberg, BBC News.
Well, Theresa May said today that she would oversee the biggest expansion of workers' rights by any Conservative government if her party won the general election. The Conservative manifesto will promise to keep EU laws which protect workers and give people the right to a year's unpaid leave to care for a relative. Our economics editor, Kamal Ahmed, has more details.
It's certainly a different life. Olga was a marketing executive who now cares for her 90-year-old mother, earning a fraction of the amount she enjoyed when work was full-time. She says today's proposals are welcome up to a point.
I've had to give up so much of my life in order to be that carer, and I think taking a year out to try and settle the caring needs, my needs, my mum's needs, was something that would have really benefited me.
What would also have benefited Olga was being paid, and on that, the Tories were silent.
Good morning, Pixies.
Theresa May launched her proposals at Tech Pixies, an Oxford firm that helps women return to work after parental leave.
Well, what we're doing today is announcing the biggest ever enhancement of workers' rights by a Conservative government. And yes, there are various elements to this, but we're, for example, committing that the national living wage will continue to rise in line with median earnings. Yes, that people will be able to request time off to care for a relative. And we want to support and encourage returnships.
Here are the workers' rights the Conservatives are offering. A right to unpaid leave to care for a family member or after the death of a child. A guarantee that all rights under EU law would be secure, such as maternity rights and equal pay, and protections for gig economy workers and those on 0 hours contracts, although there was little detail. But surely this is the party of the workers, the Labour Party, which is proposing to end 0 hours contracts and repeal trade union law. Critics lined up to call foul on the Tories.
Let's judge the Tory party and Theresa May on her record. 0-hour contracts, employment tribunal fees and the Trade Union Act, the most pernicious anti-worker legislation of the last century. Leopards don't change their spots. At best this is vacuous, at worst it's more Tory lies.
These are the firms that are going to be doing the heavy lifting. A manufacturer in Reading, yes, backing good worker conditions, but worried about what they see as plenty of anti-business noise and the cost.
If one of our members of staff came to us and said that they needed time off because, say, a parent or partner was dying and they needed time off to care for them, of course we'd look at that. I think the disappointing thing, as perhaps always, is that the government aren't actually offering any help to companies to do that.
There is a stark truth underlying every political party's offer to people in work. The economy has been pretty good at creating jobs. Employment is at a record. But it is the quality of those jobs that is the issue, particularly in a world where average incomes are not rising, they're falling.
This company literally punches holes in metal. Cutting through the vexed issue of the quality of work will be the test set for the party which wins the general election. Kamal Ahmed, BBC News.
Now, Labour's campaign manifesto will be officially unveiled tomorrow. A draft document, which was leaked last week, included plans to nationalise the railways, the National Grid and Royal Mail. But the finalised document is also expected to include plans to nationalise England's 9 regional water companies. Let's talk to our political correspondent Ben Wright at Westminster. Ben, what more details do we have?
Well, Hugh, this is further proof that a Labour government would fundamentally change the way that key industries are run. Labour say that since water was privatised in 1989, higher bills have meant a poorer service, and they point out that in the last decade, water companies have paid their shareholders £18 billion in dividends. Labour say that if it was to be taken back into public ownership, that money could be redirected into a better service and lower bills for householders. They say they could come down by about 25%. The key question, of course, is how much this is all going to cost. And when Labour's manifesto is published in full tomorrow, it will be scoured for proof their sums add up and that this can all be paid for.
Ben, thanks very much again. Ben Wright with the latest there on the Labour manifesto. Now, Essex police have spent the day searching a block of garages in Thurrock for the body of a schoolgirl who went missing 16 years ago. Danielle Jones was 15 when she was abducted and murdered by her uncle. Detectives were told about the garages at the time, but only decided to search them after a new tip-off earlier this year. Our correspondent, Robert Hall, is there for us tonight.
Hugh, the specialist team moved on to this suburban parking area at around 9 o'clock this morning. One of the first things they did was to erect the security fence you can see behind me there. And they spent much of the day concentrating their efforts on one particular garage amongst the group that they've sealed off. The work has finished for tonight, but it's an unexpected development in the hunt for Danielle Jones, whose disappearance sparked one of the largest police operations the UK's ever seen. Could this nondescript group of garages, surrounded by a housing estate, answer the question which has haunted an Essex family for so long? Have investigators finally discovered the spot where the body of 15-year-old Danielle Jones was hidden 16 years ago? The story began at 8 o'clock on a June morning when Danielle left her home here in East Tilbury to catch the school bus. Some witnesses said she turned back before reaching the bus stop, others that she'd got into a blue transit van. In those few minutes, Danielle disappeared and was never seen again.
First tonight, Danielle Jones.
In the weeks following Danielle's disappearance, the search for her became a focus of national interest. Hundreds of police officers searched over 1,000 locations. In August the same year, mobile phone evidence contributed to the arrest and eventual conviction of her uncle, Stuart Campbell. Campbell was sentenced to life for her murder, but he refused to say where he had hidden his victim's body. Today, Daniella's parents, Tony and Linda, came to see the operation, which was launched following fresh information from the public. Senior officers say it echoes non-specific information received back in 2001, but that these garages were never searched.
There was some similar information, not identical to that we received earlier this year, but clearly we'll work to understand why.
My priority this week, though, is to make sure that we do everything that we can to reunite Danielle with her family.
The search continued into the evening. It'll resume tomorrow when police say they expect to make a further statement. Robert Hall, BBC News, Essex.
Now, on his first full day in office, President Macron of France has visited Berlin for talks with Chancellor Merkel on building closer cooperation between their two countries. President Macron said that he wanted to reinvigorate links with Germany at what he called an historic moment for Europe. He talks of setting out plans to reform the Eurozone. Let's talk to our Europe editor, Katja Adler, who's in Berlin. Katja, let's talk about the significance of this meeting today and indeed the relationship between these two leaders.
Well, this is a significant moment for Europe, Hugh, embodied in what you can see as Europe's answer to the odd couple, perhaps. I mean, he is very young, never before elected to office before becoming president. She's a bit less young and looks likely to be re-elected German Chancellor for the fourth time this autumn. But what they do have in common is a true belief in the European Union. And Hugh, we've talked so often over the last couple of years over EU woes, the migration crisis, the Eurozone crisis. Well, now you have Macron and Merkel, who've been dubbed by the German press as Mercron, who want to reignite the traditional Franco-German motor of the EU and power it forward to a rosier future. Possible bumps in the road? Well, they don't always share the same vision for Europe, especially when it comes to Eurozone governance. Other EU countries don't really like the idea of being bossed around by a new king and queen of Europe, such as Poland and Hungary. And of course, this new invigorated Europe would have to survive intact what looks like a bruising Brexit process too.
Katja, thank you. Katja Adler there for us, our Europe editor in Berlin. Let's have a little more on the election campaign, because old patterns of loyalty in British politics have been reshaped in recent years, and last year's vote to leave the EU has done even more to expose the gulf between some political parties and their traditional supporters. In the second of our series on the new shape of politics, our special correspondent Alan Little has been to South Yorkshire to see the changing face of Labour's heartlands.
For a century, the heart of the British Labour movement beat to the rhythm of heavy industry. A generation ago, that Britain slid into dereliction. Hatfield Colliery in the South Yorkshire coalfield closed 2 years ago. It was one of the last.
If a Northern Soul DJ hasn't got this record, then he ain't no Northern Soul DJ. Full class.
Johnny Wood is an ex-miner. His twin passions are Northern Soul music and mining heritage. He's always voted Labour. But while most Labour MPs voted to stay in Europe, he and most of his neighbours voted to leave.
Why the hell did they vote that way? And it's simple. Because there's people from other countries getting these jobs, and there's people from other countries are being better treated than British people. And that is the anger. And it's not me being prejudiced. I play black American music, so there's no way that I'm prejudiced. I'll be an hypocrite. As MPs are not grasping that. They were out of touch, and they should come back to the grassroots.
Johnny worked here at Grimethorpe Colliery. There's a giant retail distribution centre on that site now. High-tech firms have also moved into the region, bringing new kinds of employment. Does an industrial working-class heart still beat in this new working environment?
The culture of work which dominated the old industries, the shared experience, the social and political solidarity, generation after generation of sons following their fathers into the same jobs, the centrality of organised labour, not just in the workplace, but in all of life. None of this is true of the new economy, where the workforce is more mobile, more fluid, more changeable, and less solid in its behaviour and its allegiances.
What the hell's going to happen to us? If it gets made redundant, where are we going to be in 12 months' time?
12 years, 20 years.
25 years ago, Brenda Nixon, then a miner's wife, kept a video diary for BBC Two. Back then, with her friend Sheena, she was still fighting to keep the pits open. Since then, she's seen the securities of the old industry replaced by low wages, 0 hours contracts, chronic insecurity.
just watching the bit that I have there, it's like so naive.
Yeah.
I didn't actually realise the full implication of what was going to be happening.
Yeah.
We knew it was going to be bad, but God,
Could we
envisage this? No, absolutely not. I have no faith in any parliamentary system. I believe the puppets of the ruling class, and basically they just work for them. They're only interested in their own pockets. Nobody's interested in us. I mean, I'm a single woman on my own, and at the moment I'm unemployed. But there's people out there that are working 3 jobs just to make a living as a single woman. You know, it's punishment and punishment and punishment. There is no hope anymore. There's just nothing.
South Yorkshire is still loyal Labour territory, but the working class Brexit vote has exposed the widening gulf between lives lived here and on the green benches of Westminster. And everywhere, the communities that once voted Labour as an ingrained cultural commitment have been dispersed with the industries that sustained them. Alan Little, BBC News, South Yorkshire.
Forest Green Rovers is hardly the average football team. Its environmentally responsible approach includes using solar panelling in the stadium and vegan diets. Now they've made club history by being promoted to the English Football League. Our correspondent Andy Swiss has been visiting the club at home in the town of Nailsworth in Gloucestershire.
Welcome to football's newest and unlikeliest outpost, Nailsworth. Population 5,800, pride beyond measure. After this corner of the Cotswolds, gate crashed the big time. Forest Green Rovers' win means a town that would have fitted 15 times inside Wembley will be hosting league football next season. Not bad for a team dubbed the Little Club on the Hill.
Extremely quiet place, it's a village club, and you only got to drive around the place and you realise that there's hardly anyone around, but very close-knit at Forest Green, and I think that's why they've become so successful.
It's not just what this club has achieved though, it's the way that it's achieved it. Forest Green aims to be the greenest, the most environmentally friendly football club in the world. There's solar panels on the stadium, even a solar-powered robotic lawnmower. But perhaps most strikingly, the club is all vegan. The players today were tucking into meat-free pies, while for the fans, the only burgers are of the veggie variety. It's their owner's vision, green energy millionaire Dale Vince, who says both team and supporters have embraced their diet.
There are a lot of elite athletes around the world that are vegan or are going vegan, and there's a lot of scientific evidence that it's better for elite athletes to be vegan, and that's the reason part of the reason we did it, and how we kind of presented it to the players, really, to give them an edge, a performance edge.
The club is now planning another first, an all-wooden stadium designed by the late Zaha Hadid. But for now, they're just enjoying their success story.
Let me tell you this, Cheltenham, Swindon, Newport, you're going to eat humus next season because Forest Green Rovers are in the Football League.
The tiny club with the big ambition. Andy Swiss, BBC News, Nailsworth.
And that's all from us tonight here on BBC One. It's time for the news where you are. Have a good night.